The abandoned black woman collapses in the mud as thunder crashes overhead, her bleeding hands unable to repair another broken fence post, when a towering Comanche warrior emerges through the lightning and declares, "I'm here for you." The townspeople call her cursed, whispering that her husband fled or died because even God abandoned this barren land. They expect her to disappear within weeks, another forgotten soul claimed by the unforgiving frontier. But this giant stranger arrives not as destroyer, but protector, working her fields in silence while the community watches with growing suspicion. What they don't know is that her worthless property sits atop something that could transform the entire drought-stricken territory, and powerful men will kill to claim it. The question burning through the storm-torn night: will their unlikely alliance survive long enough to uncover the deadly truth buried beneath her soil? The morning sun blazed mercilessly over the Texas frontier, turning the cracked earth into a furnace that mocked any hope of harvest. Delilah Thornfield dragged herself from her sagging bed, her calloused hands already aching before the day began. 6 months had passed since Jerome vanished without a word, leaving behind only whispered rumors and a failing homestead that seemed cursed by God himself. She stepped outside to survey the damage from yesterday's work. The fence posts leaned at broken angles. The well pump wheezed like a dying animal. Her meager crops withered in neat rows of brown disappointment. Every morning brought the same ritual of repair, rebuild, and pray for rain that never came. The walk to town stretched ahead like a gauntlet of shame. Store owner Silas Crane barely looked up when she entered, his weathered face twisted in practiced disdain. He slid a piece of paper across the counter without ceremony. "No more credit," he said. "Cash only from now on." Delilah studied the bill with the careful attention of someone who once taught children to read. The numbers swam before her tired eyes, each digit representing another nail in her coffin. "I can pay half now and half next week. Your word ain't worth much around here anymore." The comment hit harder than any physical blow. She had been a respected teacher once, back in Louisiana before dreams of Western prosperity lured her and Jerome into this nightmare. Now she was just another abandoned woman, a cautionary tale whispered in parlors and saloons. Mayor Cornelius Blackwood materialized beside her with the smooth grace of a practiced politician. His silk vest and gold watch chain marked him as the most prosperous man in 3 counties. He touched his hat with theatrical courtesy. "Mrs. Thornfield, you look troubled. Perhaps we should discuss that generous offer I mentioned." His smile never reached his eyes. The offer was anything but generous, a pittance that would leave her homeless and penniless. But Blackwood presented it as charity, a kindness she should accept with gratitude. "I need more time to consider. Time is a luxury you may not have much longer." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Blackwood controlled the bank, the town council, and half the businesses on Main Street. When he wanted something, resistance rarely lasted long. Children scattered past the store window, their laughter sharp and cruel. They had learned from their parents to treat her property like a target for their games. Stones rattled against her fence daily, accompanied by songs about cursed women and haunted land. Banker Ezra Millicent emerged from his office, his nervous eyes darting everywhere except toward Delilah. His hands trembled as he shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling. When their gazes accidentally met, he flinched as if struck by lightning. "About Jerome's accounts," she began. "Nothing to discuss, all closed, all empty." But his stammering voice betrayed deeper knowledge. Jerome had been investigating something before he disappeared, staying up late with ledgers and legal documents. Now those same papers had vanished along with her husband, leaving questions that no one seemed willing to answer. The afternoon brought fresh humiliation at the general store. Women who once invited her to quilting circles now whispered behind gloved hands. Their conversations died when she approached, replaced by cold silence and averted eyes. She had become invisible except when they needed someone to pity or blame. The ride home felt longer each day. Her horse moved with the weary resignation of an animal that sensed its owner's despair. The homestead appeared through heat shimmer like a mirage, all broken dreams and failed promises. Evening storms had been building for days, dark clouds gathering on the horizon like an army preparing for battle. The wind carried the scent of rain that would either save or destroy what little remained of her crops. Thunder rolled across the prairie as the first drops began to fall. Within minutes, the sprinkle became a downpour. Delilah rushed to secure anything that might blow away, her dress soaking through as lightning split the sky. The roof gave way with a crack like breaking bones. Water poured through the gap, flooding her tiny kitchen and destroying what little food she had stored. The well pump seized completely, its metal parts grinding to a permanent halt. She collapsed in the mud beside her ruined fence, rain mixing with tears as the full weight of impossibility crushed down upon her. 6 months of struggle had led to this moment of absolute defeat. Her hands bled from splinters and sharp metal. Her strength was gone. The storm raged with biblical fury, turning her small world into chaos. She could not repair the roof alone. She could not fix the pump or rebuild the fence. Everything Jerome had worked for was washing away in rivers of brown water. Through the lightning and thunder, a massive shadow emerged from the darkness. The figure approached without fear of the storm, moving with purpose through wind that bent trees double. When lightning illuminated his face, she saw features carved from stone and eyes that held ancient wisdom. "I'm here for you." If you are enjoying this story of how an unlikely alliance will change everything forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distances, backgrounds, and hearts. Because what will happen in the next 15 minutes on this Texas frontier will completely change both of their destinies. The giant Comanche stood 6 feet 8 inches tall, his presence commanding even in the driving rain. Standing Wolf moved with quiet efficiency, lifting fallen beams as if they weighed nothing. His hands worked with the precision of someone who understood both traditional craftsmanship and modern construction. He spoke no more words that first night. Instead, he covered the roof hole with canvas weighted down by stones. He cleared debris from around the well pump with methodical care. When morning came, he had repaired 3 sections of fence using techniques Delilah had never seen. She watched him work from her kitchen window, unsure whether to feel grateful or terrified. No explanation came with his help. He simply appeared each dawn and labored until dusk, asking for nothing in return. The townspeople noticed immediately. Sheriff Morton rode out on the second day, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. His weathered face carried the suspicion of a man who had seen too much trouble. "That's a dangerous one you got there, ma'am. He's helping with repairs. Indians don't help, they take. You best send him on his way before folks get upset." But Standing Wolf continued his work, seemingly unbothered by the sheriff's warnings or the growing number of riders who found excuses to pass by Delilah's property. His presence drew attention like a lightning rod, sparking conversations in every saloon and church pew. Mayor Blackwood arrived on the third day with his usual theatrical concern. His silk vest remained spotless despite the dusty ride, and his smile carried the warmth of a snake in winter. He studied Standing Wolf with calculating eyes. "Mrs. Thornfield, surely you understand the delicate nature of our situation. Tensions run high when certain elements disturb the peace. He's caused no trouble. His very presence is trouble. Good Christian folk worry about their safety, their children, their property values." Standing Wolf never acknowledged these conversations, but his work spoke louder than any words. He cleared irrigation channels with an engineer's precision. He reinforced the barn with joints that would outlast the original structure. Most remarkably, he began teaching Delilah farming techniques that seemed to coax life from the stubborn soil. The lessons came through demonstration rather than explanation. He showed her how to read wind patterns and soil moisture. His hands guided hers as she learned to identify which seeds would thrive in drought conditions. Under his patient instruction, She began to see her failed farm through new eyes. Her own talents emerged gradually through necessity. Years of teaching had trained her to absorb information quickly and think systematically. She began studying her property with the same analytical approach she once used for lesson plans. The old surveyor's marker appeared after a particularly violent thunderstorm washed away decades of accumulated dirt. Standing Wolf froze when he saw the carved symbols, his usual calm replaced by intense focus. He traced the markings with reverent fingers, recognition dawning in his dark eyes. Delilah had learned enough about reading people to recognize significance when she saw it. The marker meant something important, something that connected to Standing Wolf's presence in ways she couldn't yet understand. "What does it say?" He looked at her for a long moment, weighing trust against caution. When he finally spoke, his English carried the precise diction of formal education. "Sacred water. My people have protected this place for 7 generations." The revelation opened floodgates of understanding. Her well had never run dry, even during the worst drought in local memory. Other homesteaders traveled miles to find water while hers flowed freely just 20 feet from her kitchen door. "The tribal elders sent me to watch over the source, but I stayed to help you because you treat the land with respect." His education came from mission schools, he explained, making him a bridge between two worlds that rarely understood each other. The tribal council had chosen him for this guardian role precisely because he could navigate both cultures. Mayor Blackwood's reaction to the marker discovery was immediate and intense. He arrived within hours, somehow having learned about the find before Delilah had fully processed its implications herself. His usual composure cracked when he saw the ancient symbols. "I'll need to have our surveyor examine this immediately. There may be legal complications regarding property boundaries." But his eyes betrayed knowledge that went deeper than simple boundary disputes. He paced around the marker like a caged animal, asking questions that revealed more than they inquired. Standing Wolf watched these interactions with the patience of someone accustomed to reading truth beneath surface words. His presence had clearly disturbed some larger plan, though the full scope remained hidden. The town's response split along predictable lines. Church ladies organized prayer circles to discuss the situation. Saloon patrons debated whether Indians could be trusted under any circumstances. Store owners worried about property values and business disruptions, but a few voices spoke differently. Old rancher Tom Cassidy admitted his cattle preferred water from Delilah's area over his own wells. Schoolmarm Sarah Jenkins remembered Delilah's excellent teaching and questioned why good help should be refused regardless of its source. The emergency town council meeting was called for Friday evening. Mayor Blackwood promised to address community concerns about safety and property rights. The invitation was phrased as civic duty, but everyone understood the real message. Standing Wolf's presence had upset some carefully laid plans. His alliance with Delilah represented a threat that went beyond simple cultural prejudice. Something valuable was at stake, something worth mobilizing an entire town to protect. The marker sat like a stone prophecy in Delilah's yard, its ancient symbols pointing toward truths that powerful men preferred to keep buried. The surveyor's marker revealed secrets that transformed everything. Standing Wolf explained the symbols with reverence reserved for sacred things. The markings indicated a spring that fed an underground river system stretching for miles beneath the drought-stricken prairie. "Your well taps into water that has flowed here since my ancestors first walked this land. It connects to streams that could sustain every farm in 3 counties." The revelation hit Delilah like lightning. Her supposedly worthless property sat atop the most valuable resource in the territory. Water meant life in this parched landscape, and she controlled access to an endless supply. Word spread through town faster than wildfire. The same people who had mocked her cursed land now appeared at her door with forced smiles and partnership proposals. Store owner Silas Crane suddenly remembered her excellent credit history. Women who had whispered cruel gossip now invited her to church socials. The transformation was both gratifying and nauseating. Their kindness felt as hollow as their previous cruelty. She had not changed. Only their perception of her value had shifted with the promise of profit. Developer Harrison Mills arrived from Austin within a week, his expensive carriage and Eastern suits marking him as serious money. He spoke of irrigation systems and agricultural prosperity, painting visions of a thriving settlement built around her water source. "Think of the good you could do, Mrs. Thornfield. Hundreds of families could prosper here. Children could have schools and churches. Your land could birth a real city." But his eyes calculated profit margins while his mouth spoke of community good. Behind his grand plans lurked the familiar hunger of men who saw resources to be extracted rather than legacies to be preserved. Standing Wolf faced his own crisis. A delegation of tribal elders arrived to demand his immediate return. They spoke in rapid Comanche, their voices carrying the authority of generations. His responses grew more strained with each exchange. "They say I have forgotten my duty to my people, that I serve white interests over tribal law." The accusation cut deep because it held kernels of truth. His mission was to protect the sacred water, not to help a settler woman farm it. Yet he had made his choice, and retreat felt like betrayal of everything he had come to believe about honor and justice. Delilah threw herself into research with the focused intensity she once brought to lesson planning. She studied water rights law, territorial regulations, and property statutes. Her teaching experience served her well, as she absorbed complex legal concepts and identified crucial details. The law favored her position in most respects. Her deed was legitimate, her property taxes current, and her water rights clearly established. But legal technicalities meant little when powerful interests aligned against a single woman. Mayor Blackwood escalated his pressure through official channels. The town council passed emergency ordinances about public safety and resource management. Environmental assessments were ordered. Health inspections were scheduled. Every bureaucratic weapon was deployed to create legal justification for seizing her land. The strategy was transparent but effective. Fighting each regulation would cost money she did not have and time she could not afford. The accumulated weight of official harassment could crush her, even if individual challenges failed. Standing Wolf shared knowledge passed down through generations of his people. He taught her to read the land's subtle messages, to understand how water moved through soil and stone. Under his guidance, she began implementing conservation techniques that made her crops thrive despite the ongoing drought. Their partnership deepened beyond mere cooperation. She brought analytical thinking and formal education to complement his traditional wisdom and practical skills. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone. The town split into opposing factions. Established families sided with Mayor Blackwood and the promise of development money. Struggling farmers began to see Delilah as their salvation from drought and debt. The conflict simmered through every social interaction. Church services became battlegrounds of whispered politics. Business meetings turned into debates about progress versus preservation. Even children reflected their parents' divisions, with playground arguments mimicking adult tensions. Standing Wolf's presence complicated every equation. His obvious intelligence and education challenged assumptions about his people, but his cultural otherness remained a barrier many townspeople could not cross. Some began to respect him, while others saw him as a threat to everything they understood about social order. The sacred nature of the water source created additional complications. Standing Wolf explained that his ancestors were buried near the spring, making the land a spiritual site that transcended property laws. Disturbing it would violate treaties and tribal agreements that preceded territorial governance. "This is not just about water rights or farming profits. You stand on ground that holds the bones of chiefs and medicine men. Their spirits protect this place." Delilah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She was no longer just fighting for her own survival, but serving as guardian for something ancient and irreplaceable. Mayor Blackwood's desperation became increasingly obvious. His public statements grew more aggressive, his legal maneuvers more creative. He brought in experts to challenge the validity of tribal claims and historians to dispute the marker's authenticity. But his efforts felt forced, as if he was fighting against time and circumstance rather than pursuing a natural course. His investment in acquiring her specific property seemed disproportionate to its apparent value, even accounting for the water discovery. The court date was set for the following month. Judge Harrison would decide whether the town could exercise eminent domain to seize her property for public good. The hearing would determine not just her fate, but the future of the sacred spring and everything it represented. Standing Wolf made his final choice. He would stay and fight regardless of tribal pressure, honoring his commitment to protect both the water and the woman who had earned his respect through courage and character. Banker Ezra Millicent's hands shook more violently each passing day. His once pristine office became a chaos of scattered papers and half-empty whiskey bottles. The weight of his secret pressed against his chest like a physical burden, making sleep impossible and meals tasteless. Delilah noticed his deterioration during her weekly visits to discuss the impending foreclosure. The man who once spoke with banking authority now mumbled responses and avoided direct eye contact. His nervous energy filled the small office like trapped lightning. "About Jerome's final transactions," she pressed gently. "Nothing unusual, standard account closure, everything proper and legal." But his voice cracked on the word legal, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Something about Jerome's disappearance gnawed at him with increasing intensity. Standing Wolf accompanied her to these meetings, his silent presence clearly unnerving the banker further. Ezra's eyes darted between them like a cornered animal seeking escape. His stammering grew worse when the Comanche's steady gaze focused on him. The investigation into Jerome's disappearance had yielded frustrating dead ends. Sheriff Morton claimed no evidence of foul play existed, but his answers felt rehearsed. The official story was simple. Jerome abandoned his wife and debts to start fresh somewhere else. Yet inconsistencies emerged when Delilah applied her teacher's analytical mind to the details. Jerome's clothes remained in their bedroom. His favorite horse still grazed in their pasture. Most telling, his grandmother's Bible stayed on their nightstand, the one possession he would never willingly abandon. She discovered more discrepancies while sorting through returned personal effects. The items came from the wrong family entirely, belongings that had never been Jerome's. Someone had made a careless mistake in covering tracks that should have remained hidden. Standing Wolf helped her examine each piece of evidence with methodical care. His tracking skills, honed through generations of tribal knowledge, revealed details others had missed. Scuff marks on Jerome's boots told stories of struggle. Torn fabric suggested violence rather than voluntary departure. "Your husband found something someone wanted buried," Standing Wolf concluded after studying the evidence. The comment opened new avenues of investigation. Jerome had been unusually focused in his final weeks, staying up late with ledgers and legal documents. He had mentioned irregularities in town financial records, but dismissed her questions as unimportant. Now, those same documents had vanished along with her husband, leaving gaps that suggested deliberate removal rather than accidental loss. Someone had carefully edited the story of Jerome's final days. Mayor Blackwood's behavior grew increasingly erratic as the court date approached. His public appearances became performances of barely controlled desperation. He spoke of civic duty and community progress, but his eyes held the wildness of a man fighting for survival rather than principle. His interest in her property seemed disproportionate, even accounting for the water discovery. The timeline of his involvement predated any knowledge of the sacred spring, suggesting deeper motivations that remained carefully hidden. Standing Wolf observed these dynamics with the patience of a hunter reading prey behavior. His years navigating between two cultures had taught him to recognize deception in all its forms. Blackwood's mounting panic suggested guilt far beyond simple land acquisition schemes. The community pressure intensified daily. Supporters of development money grew more vocal in their demands for progress. They organized meetings and petitions, creating the appearance of grassroots momentum behind Blackwood's eminent domain petition. But quieter voices began supporting Delilah's cause. Farmers struggling with drought saw her water rights as potential salvation for their own properties. Church members questioned the morality of seizing a widow's only asset. Doubts about the official narrative spread through whispered conversations. Ezra's drinking accelerated as the court date loomed. His wife complained to neighbors about his nightmares and restless pacing. He began making cryptic comments about truth and justice, statements that suggested knowledge he desperately wanted to share. The banker's crisis deepened when Delilah discovered Jerome had visited him twice in the week before his disappearance. Official bank records showed no appointments, but witnesses remembered seeing them in intense conversation. Whatever they discussed had left lasting marks on Ezra's conscience. Standing Wolf's tribal connections provided additional context for understanding the land's significance. The sacred spring had been a gathering place for generations, neutral ground where different tribes came to settle disputes and make important decisions. Its waters were considered blessed by the spirits of great chiefs. "Your husband respected this place," Standing Wolf revealed. "He asked questions about tribal history and water rights. He understood the spring meant more than irrigation profits." The comment suggested Jerome had discovered not just financial corruption, but cultural desecration in Blackwood's plans. His investigation had threatened something larger than municipal embezzlement. Letters arrived from territorial officials promising swift resolution of the land dispute. Their language carried the weight of predetermined outcomes rather than judicial consideration. The fix appeared to be progressing through proper legal channels, yet cracks appeared in the coordinated effort. Dates on documents conflicted with established timelines. Signatures looked suspiciously similar across different agencies. The appearance of legitimacy masked procedural irregularities that a careful observer might challenge. Standing Wolf made preparations for the court hearing with military precision. He gathered tribal elders willing to testify about the spring's sacred nature. He documented environmental evidence of the water system's extent and importance. Most importantly, he prepared to speak truth regardless of personal consequences. Delilah organized her own evidence with similar care. Her teaching experience served her well as she created presentations that could communicate complex ideas clearly. She prepared for legal battle as thoroughly as she had once prepared lesson plans. The night before the hearing, Ezra Millicent appeared at her door. Rain streaked his face, but tears mixed with the weather. His hands clutched a small brass key that gleamed dully in the lamplight. "I can't carry this anymore," he whispered. "Jerome was murdered, and I helped cover it up." Ezra Millicent collapsed into Delilah's kitchen chair like a man whose spine had finally snapped under unbearable weight. The brass key trembled in his palm while rain hammered the roof above them. Standing Wolf positioned himself near the door, alert to any approaching danger. "Jerome came to me with ledgers," Ezra began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Federal drought relief money, territorial development funds, emergency assistance grants. Blackwood was stealing it all." The confession poured out in broken fragments. Jerome had discovered systematic embezzlement spanning 3 years. Thousands of dollars meant to help struggling farmers had vanished into Blackwood's private accounts. Money designated for well digging and irrigation projects had been diverted to phantom companies. "Your husband was furious. Said families were dying of thirst while Blackwood built his mansion. Threatened to take the evidence to the territorial governor." Delilah felt her world shift as the truth emerged. Jerome had not abandoned her for another life. He had died trying to protect their community from corruption that reached into every corner of local government. The safety deposit box key represented Jerome's insurance policy. He had hidden copies of all financial records, correspondence, and evidence of the embezzlement scheme. The documentation would destroy Blackwood's career and send him to federal prison. Blackwood found out about the investigation. He had your husband killed and made it look like he ran away. Forced me to help transfer Jerome's accounts to make the abandonment story believable. Standing Wolf's jaw tightened as he absorbed the implications. The sacred spring had become a convenient cover story for Blackwood's real motivation. Seizing Delilah's land would eliminate the last witness to his crimes, while providing a heroic narrative to explain his sudden wealth. Ezra's hands shook as he explained the cover-up details. Jerome's body had been buried in an unmarked grave miles from town. His personal effects had been scattered to create false trails. Bank records had been altered to support the abandonment narrative. I never meant for it to go this far. Thought maybe the truth would stay buried with him. But watching you suffer, seeing what Blackwood's willing to do to get your land, I can't live with this anymore. The revelation transformed everything Delilah understood about her situation. She was not fighting a simple land grab but battling a murderer desperate to cover his tracks. Blackwood's increasing desperation made perfect sense now. Discovery meant death or federal prison. Standing Wolf studied the key with the careful attention he brought to tracking dangerous prey. His military training from his youth had taught him to recognize when enemies were cornered and most dangerous. Blackwood would stop at nothing to prevent exposure. He plans to claim discovering the water source himself, Ezra continued. Say it justifies all the missing development money. Turn theft into heroic resource management. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Blackwood would emerge as the visionary leader who found salvation for the drought-stricken territory. The stolen money would be reframed as wise investment in water rights acquisition. History would be rewritten to make him a hero rather than a criminal, but Jerome's evidence could destroy the entire fabrication. Bank records showing diverted funds, correspondence revealing the embezzlement timeline, and documentation proving Blackwood knew about the water source months before claiming to discover it. Delilah felt rage building in her chest like a furnace fire. Her husband had died protecting people who barely tolerated her existence. His murder had been covered up to preserve the reputation of a man who stole food from starving families. Standing Wolf recognized the dangerous moment. Vengeance was a path that led to destruction for everyone involved. Justice required patience and strategic thinking rather than emotional reaction. The hearing is tomorrow. We present this evidence properly through legal channels. Ezra nodded frantically, desperate to make amends for his cowardice. He provided additional details about the embezzlement scheme, naming other officials who had been compromised or intimidated into silence. The corruption extended beyond Blackwood into territorial administration. The safety deposit box contained more than financial records. Jerome had documented threats against other potential witnesses. He had traced money flows through multiple banks and dummy corporations. His investigation had been thorough and methodical, building an airtight case against Blackwood. Your husband was smarter than any of us realized. He knew they might kill him, so he created multiple insurance policies. Evidence cached in different locations, trusted contacts who would act if he disappeared. But Jerome had underestimated how quickly Blackwood would move once threatened. The murder had been swift and brutal, eliminating the primary witness before he could activate his safeguards. Standing Wolf began planning security measures for the court hearing. Blackwood would be desperate once he realized his crimes were about to be exposed. Cornered predators attacked with lethal fury, and tomorrow would determine whether justice or corruption prevailed. The tribal elders had agreed to testify about the sacred spring's importance. Their presence would add weight to the environmental arguments while demonstrating broad community support for protecting the water source. Delilah organized Jerome's evidence with the same methodical care she had once brought to creating lesson plans. Each document told part of a larger story about corruption, murder, and the lengths powerful men would go to protect their crimes. The rain stopped near midnight, leaving crystal-clear skies that seemed to promise a new beginning. Tomorrow would bring either vindication or disaster. The truth about Jerome's death would finally emerge from the shadows where it had been buried. Standing Wolf maintained his vigil through the dark hours, knowing that dawn would bring the most dangerous day of their unlikely partnership. Blackwood had killed once to protect his secrets. He would not hesitate to kill again if cornered in court. The safety deposit box key gleamed in the lamplight like a talisman of justice. Tomorrow it would unlock more than hidden documents. It would reveal the truth that could transform their entire community. The courthouse overflowed with spectators by dawn. Every seat was filled with townspeople whose lives would be affected by the day's proceedings. Farmers clutched their hats nervously while merchants whispered about property values and business prospects. The tension was thick enough to cut with a blade. Judge Harrison entered with the weary dignity of a man who had seen too many land disputes destroy communities. His weathered face revealed nothing as he surveyed the packed courtroom. Mayor Blackwood sat at the plaintiff's table, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. Delilah took her place with Standing Wolf beside her. The sight of the towering Comanche in formal court proceedings drew stares and whispered comments. His presence challenged every assumption about who belonged in civilized society. Blackwood's attorney opened with passionate arguments about community needs and public welfare. He painted pictures of dying crops and desperate families who needed access to the precious water source. Delilah was portrayed as a selfish woman hoarding resources while neighbors suffered. The performance was masterful, appealing to both practical concerns and moral outrage. Several townspeople nodded along as the lawyer described their vision of shared prosperity built around the sacred spring. Then Delilah stood to present her evidence. Her teaching experience served her well, as she organized complex financial documents into a clear narrative of corruption and murder. The courtroom fell silent as she methodically destroyed Blackwood's reputation. Bank records showed systematic theft of federal relief funds. Correspondence revealed Blackwood's knowledge of the water source months before his supposed discovery. Most damaging, Jerome's investigation had documented every aspect of the embezzlement scheme. "My husband died because he discovered Mayor Blackwood was stealing money meant to help drought victims. The very people Blackwood claims to serve were being robbed blind by their elected leader." The revelation hit the packed courtroom like a physical blow. Farmers who had supported the land seizure suddenly understood why their relief applications had been denied. Families who had lost everything to drought realized their suffering had funded Blackwood's luxury lifestyle. Standing Wolf rose to testify about the sacred nature of the spring. His deep voice carried the authority of generations as he explained the cultural significance of the water source. Tribal elders had traveled from distant reservations to support his testimony. "This land holds the bones of our ancestors and the prayers of 7 generations. It is not property to be bought and sold, but a sacred trust that must be protected for future generations." His words challenged the fundamental assumptions of territorial law while appealing to universal concepts of respect and stewardship. Even skeptical townspeople found themselves moved by his obvious sincerity and deep connection to the land. Ezra Millicent's testimony provided the final pieces of the corruption puzzle. His voice shook as he confessed his role in covering up Jerome's murder, but his detailed knowledge of the financial crimes left no room for doubt about Blackwood's guilt. The banker's redemption came through brutal honesty about his own cowardice and complicity. His willingness to destroy his own reputation for the sake of truth carried tremendous weight with Judge Harrison. Blackwood's desperation became obvious as the evidence mounted against him. His attorney's objections grew increasingly frantic. He tried to discredit witnesses through personal attacks and racial prejudice, but the documented proof was overwhelming. The mayor's final gambit was a direct appeal to community prejudice. He stood and pointed at Standing Wolf with theatrical outrage, claiming the entire proceeding was a conspiracy between Indians and ungrateful settlers to steal white men's rightful property. The ugly display backfired spectacularly. Townspeople who had lived through Blackwood's corruption for years recognized his familiar pattern of deflecting blame onto convenient targets. His desperation only confirmed his guilt. Judge Harrison's verdict was swift and decisive. The eminent domain petition was denied based on the fraudulent nature of the underlying claims. More importantly, federal marshals were summoned to arrest Blackwood on charges of embezzlement, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. The courtroom erupted as Blackwood was led away in shackles. Some townspeople cheered while others sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of the corruption that had been exposed. Years of suffering finally made sense. Delilah felt vindication wash over her like cool water after a long drought. Jerome's sacrifice had not been in vain. His investigation had finally achieved its purpose of protecting the community from predatory leadership. Standing Wolf's tribal elders approached with formal proposals for sharing the water source. Their agreement established sustainable usage rights that would benefit both the town and the reservation while protecting the spring's sacred nature. The cooperative structure emerged naturally from the crisis. Farmers who had been played against each other by Blackwood's manipulation now saw the wisdom of working together. Delilah's teaching skills made her a natural coordinator for the new agricultural partnership. 1 year later, the transformation was complete. Drought-resistant crops flourished under Delilah's guidance, while traditional irrigation methods shared by Standing Wolf's people maximized water efficiency. The sacred spring supported a thriving community without being depleted. A monument to Jerome stood in the town square, honoring his courage in exposing corruption and protecting his neighbors. The inscription read simply, "He died for truth and lived for justice." Standing Wolf had become a permanent bridge between the tribal community and the growing town. His cultural knowledge and diplomatic skills helped establish treaties and trading relationships that benefited everyone. Ezra managed the cooperative's finances with scrupulous honesty, his guilt over past cowardice driving him to become a fierce guardian of community resources. His redemption came through years of faithful service. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors as Delilah and Standing Wolf watched from beside the sacred spring. Two unlikely allies had transformed their world through dignity, truth, and the courage to stand against injustice. The water flowed eternal, carrying the promises of the past into an uncertain but hopeful future.